There are people who walk through crowds and feel completely alone, not because they want to be, not because they're broken, but because somewhere along the way, connection started to feel like a language they never learned to speak. They see groups laughing at tables, friends texting back and forth, inside jokes that build into lifelong bonds, and they wonder what invisible thread they're missing. The world calls it loneliness. Psychology calls it something else. It's not about being unlikable. It's about learning very early that reaching out might hurt more than staying hidden. This is the psychology no one sees. The silence you carry. When aloneness becomes a learned identity and the absence of friendship feels like a personal failure no one else understands, there's a particular kind of silence that follows people who have no friends. Not the comfortable quiet of solitude, but the heavy kind. The kind that sits in the chest during lunch breaks, on Friday nights, in comment sections where everyone seems to belong somewhere. They don't talk about it much, because how do you explain that friendship feels foreign? That watching people connect looks like watching a dance you were never taught? The shame is quiet but persistent. It whispers that everyone else figured out the secret, but the truth is softer than that. People without friends aren't missing some social gene. They're often deeply perceptive, emotionally intelligent. They notice things others don't. The shift in someone's tone, the moment a conversation turns performative. They feel too much too quickly, and somewhere along the way, they learned that feeling less was safer than feeling everything. Psychologists call this emotional withdrawal, a protective mechanism that forms when connection has been repeatedly paired with pain, rejection, misunderstanding, abandonment. The nervous system learns to associate people with threat, so it builds walls that look like preference, like independence, but underneath there's often a child who wanted to be seen and wasn't. The paradox is cruel. The very people who crave connection the most often become the best at avoiding it. They develop an expertise in self-sufficiency, in convincing themselves that solitude is a strength, not a wound, and maybe it is both. Maybe the ability to be alone is born from necessity, and the inability to reach out is born from survival. Friendship for them isn't a casual thing, it's loaded, weighted with every time it didn't work, every group that didn't make space, every text that went unanswered, so they stopped trying, not because they don't care, but because caring without reciprocation is its own kind of violence. Where it begins. How early attachment patterns shape the capacity for adult friendship, often without conscious memory. The roots of friendlessness don't begin in adulthood, they begin in childhood, in the earliest blueprints of connection. Attachment theory tells us that early relationships become the template for all relationships that follow. If a child learns that their needs are met with consistency and warmth, they develop secure attachment. They learn that people are safe, that closeness is possible. But if the early environment is unpredictable, dismissive, or emotionally unavailable, something else forms. The child learns that needing others is dangerous, that expressing emotion leads to rejection or neglect. Psychologists call this avoidant attachment, and it doesn't go away when childhood ends. Children with avoidant attachment often look independent, self-reliant. They don't cry for help. Teachers praise them for being mature, but underneath there's a profound loneliness, a sense that they exist in a parallel world watching others connect with an ease that feels impossible. They don't know how to ask for what they need because asking has never worked. This carries into school, into the playground politics of who gets picked for teams, who gets invited to birthday parties. Children are remarkably perceptive. They sense when someone doesn't know how to play the game. And children, in their cruelty and innocence, often exclude what they don't understand, the quiet kid, the one who feels too much or not enough. Exclusion becomes a pattern, and patterns become identity. By adolescence, the wiring is mostly set. The brain has learned that connection is risky, painful, that being alone is safer. This isn't conscious. It's not a decision. It's a nervous system response. The body remembers what the mind has forgotten. Every early moment of unmet need, the body remembers and it protects accordingly. What loneliness does to the brain, how chronic isolation rewires perception, emotion, and threat response. Loneliness is not just an emotion, it's a biological alarm. The brain processes social isolation the same way it processes physical pain. Studies show that rejection activates the same neural regions as a broken bone. The brain perceives social exclusion as a survival threat, because for most of human history, it was. But what happens when that alarm goes off for years? The brain adapts. It rewires. Chronic loneliness changes the way people perceive social cues. They begin to interpret neutral faces as hostile, ambiguous interactions as rejection. This is called rejection sensitivity. The brain, flooded with stress hormones and hypervigilant to threat, starts to see danger everywhere. Neuroscientist John Cacioppo studied loneliness for decades. His research revealed that lonely people don't lack social skills. They often have above average emotional intelligence, but their brains are stuck in hyperarousal. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes overactive. The prefrontal cortex becomes less effective. This means that even when opportunities for connection arise, the brain interprets them through a lens of threat. There's also the role of oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Oxytocin is released during positive social interactions, but for people with a history of rejection, oxytocin can actually increase anxiety. It makes them more aware of social threats. The very chemical meant to facilitate bonding becomes a source of pain. The brain craves connection, but perceives it as dangerous, so it withdraws. And here's the cruelest part. The longer someone is isolated, the harder it becomes to reconnect. Social skills atrophy, confidence fades. The idea of reaching out becomes terrifying. So they wait, they hope someone will notice, but people are busy and the silence stretches longer. The isolation becomes self-sustaining, invisible, devastating. The push and pull, the internal conflict of craving connection while simultaneously sabotaging it. There's a war that happens inside people without friends, a quiet battle between two equally powerful forces. One part of them aches for connection, craves it, fantasizes about deep conversations, shared laughter, someone who really sees them. This part watches friendship and movies and feels grief. This part is tender, vulnerable, hopeful, but there's another part, the part that has been hurt too many times, the part that remembers every rejection, every exclusion. This part says, don't try, it won't work, you'll just get hurt again. It's safer here, alone. This part builds walls and calls them boundaries, pushes people away before they can leave. Psychologists call this ambivalent attachment, the simultaneous desire for closeness and terror of it. Someone reaches out with an invitation. The response is hesitant, non-committal, or ignored entirely, not because they don't want to go, but because accepting feels like opening a door to inevitable disappointment, so they stay home. Feel relief, then regret, then shame. There's also the phenomenon of testing. Unconsciously, people without friends often test those who try to get close. They withdraw to see if the person will pursue. They share something vulnerable and watch for judgment. These aren't manipulations, they're survival checks. The nervous system asking, is this person safe? But the tests themselves often become the reason people leave, which only confirms the original belief. See, no one stays. There's a deep exhaustion in this, the constant vigilance, the overthinking, replaying conversations for signs of rejection, analyzing tone, word choice, pauses. The mind becomes a courtroom, endlessly prosecuting evidence of unworthiness, and the verdict is always the same: guilty. Guilty of being too much or not enough. So they retreat. Gradually, they stop initiating, stop sharing, stop showing up. They tell themselves it's fine, that they're better off alone, and maybe that's partially true. Maybe solitude does offer a kind of peace, but it's also a surrender, a quiet resignation, where safety is prioritized over joy, where protection is chosen over possibility. When you finally see it, a turning point where awareness shifts from self-blame to understanding. Something shifts when you finally see the pattern, not as failure, not as proof that you're broken, but as a response, a survival strategy that made perfect sense once. Even if it doesn't serve anymore, this moment is quiet, often arrives in therapy, or while reading something that names the thing you couldn't name, or when someone says, "Me too." This shift is profound, because for so long the narrative has been, something is wrong with me, I'm defective, unlikable. But when you understand attachment, when you see how early wiring shapes everything, the story changes. It's not that you're incapable of friendship. It's that your brain learned connection was dangerous, and it's been trying to keep you safe ever since. This doesn't erase the pain, but it offers compassion, permission to stop blaming yourself for a nervous system response you didn't choose. There's grief in this awareness too. Grief for the friendships that could have been, for the years spent isolated, for the younger self who needed someone to understand and didn't get it. But within the grief, there's also clarity, because once you see the pattern, you can't unseen it. You start to notice when the old wiring kicks in, when the urge to withdraw arises, and instead of being swept along unconsciously, there's a pause, a moment of choice, not to force connection you're not ready for, but to notice, to name it, to understand that the fear is real, but it's also old. Some people find that understanding is enough, others need more. Therapy, relationships that are patient enough to withstand the testing. Healing isn't linear. Some days connection feels possible. Other days the walls go back up, and that's okay too. The goal isn't to have 50 friends. The goal is to stop punishing yourself for the wiring you inherited. The quiet possibility, a meditation on healing and the slow rebuilding of trust from the inside out. Healing doesn't look the way people think it will. It's not about suddenly becoming social or collecting friends like proof of progress. It's quieter than that, more internal. It's the slow rebuilding of trust, not in others first, but in yourself and your ability to know what you need, to honor your limits. The walls don't come down all at once, and maybe they don't need to. Maybe some walls are necessary. Maybe the work isn't about tearing everything down, but about building a door, something you can open when you choose, when it feels safe. This is the paradox. You have to risk being hurt again, but this time you do it consciously with awareness. Connection, when it comes, often looks different than expected. It's not large friend groups or constant social calendars. It's one person who gets it, who doesn't need you to perform, who's okay with the silence. These connections are rare, but they exist, and they're worth the risk. Because being truly seen, even by one person, changes something fundamental. There's also the work of reparenting, of giving yourself what you didn't receive, the patience, the unconditional acceptance. You learn to talk to yourself the way you wish someone had talked to you when you were small and scared and alone. This is survival. This is building an internal foundation strong enough to withstand the inevitable moments when people disappoint. Some people rebuild their relationship with friendship entirely. They find communities that match their energy, who don't drain them, who celebrate their weirdness instead of punishing it. They learn that friendship doesn't have to look like what they were taught, that it can be slow, spacious, intentional, that quality matters more than quantity, and for some, friendlessness remains, not as tragedy, but as reality, and they build a life around it, a life that's full in other ways, creative work, solitary pursuits, a rich internal world. They stop measuring themselves against a standard that was never theirs. They stop apologizing. They exist as they are. The psychology no one sees is this: isolation is not a choice for most people. It's a response, a learned behavior born from pain, and understanding it doesn't fix it, but it does offer something else: compassion for yourself, for everyone walking through the world feeling invisible. You were never meant to do this alone, but you did, and you survived, and that matters. Whether you find friendship or not, whether the walls come down or stay up, you matter. The loneliness doesn't change that. Nothing does.